It was meant to be an ordinary day in court. Another case on the docket, another name called, another story told. For everyone sitting in that solemn, wood-paneled room, it was routine, predictable even. They had witnessed the same motions countless times. Charges read, defense offered, verdicts handed down. But today, something different was about to happen. Justice was going to take a sharp and unexpected turn, one that no one in the room saw coming, and one that none of them would ever forget. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Heads turned, some with idle curiosity, others barely noticing. Through the doors walked a tall, impeccably dressed black man. His stride was steady, his shoulders squared with quiet strength. His name was Jonathan Mercer. Jonathan was in his late 30s, his close-cropped hair peppered with faint traces of silver that added to his air of dignity. His dark gray suit was tailored perfectly to his frame, and his black leather shoes gleamed with every measured step he took. In his left hand, he carried a polished leather briefcase, and his right hand hung easily by his side. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, though his dark eyes seemed to take in everything around him with sharp precision. To most people in the courtroom that day, he looked like just another defendant. Another black man accused of something he probably didn't do, or maybe he did. It was easy to assume, after all. No one asked questions. No one really cared. They had no idea who Jonathan Mercer really was. They didn't know the power he held, nor the truth that he was about to bring crashing down on this entire proceeding. But they would soon find out. 3 months earlier, it had been an exhausting day. Jonathan had spent over 10 hours at his office, reviewing depositions and preparing briefs for a complex federal case. He wasn't supposed to be working that late, but deadlines didn't respect personal time. Finally, around 10 at night, he decided to call it a day and headed home. His car, a sleek black BMW 5 Series, was waiting in the underground parking garage. He got in, turned on his favorite jazz playlist, and began his drive through the quiet streets. The red and blue flashing lights came out of nowhere. Jonathan noticed them in his rearview mirror, and his stomach sank. He wasn't speeding. His registration was up to date. He signaled and pulled over to the curb in a calm, controlled motion. He turned down the music and rolled his window down halfway. This was supposed to be a simple traffic stop, but it was anything but simple. 2 police officers approached his car. Their faces were hard, unreadable, their hands already hovering near their holstered weapons. One was a younger officer, maybe late 20s, buzz-cut hair, and a rigid posture that betrayed his nervousness. The other was older, broader, with tired eyes and a badge that glinted in the streetlight. License and registration, the older officer barked. Jonathan nodded, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Certainly, officer," he said politely, reaching toward his glove compartment. But before he could retrieve his documents, the younger officer yanked open his car door. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered sharply. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He glanced at the officer, holding his hands up for them to see. "Excuse me? May I ask why, officer?" His voice remained calm, though he felt a familiar, sickening twist of dread in his gut. "I said step out. Now!" The younger officer barked again, his tone more forceful. Jonathan didn't argue. He had been in enough situations to know how quickly things could escalate. Slowly, he stepped out of the car, his hands raised above his shoulders, palms open to show he posed no threat. The night air was thick, heavy. Tension crackled like static around them. Jonathan took a deep breath, but it did little to steady the pounding in his chest. Suddenly, he was shoved forward. His chest hit the cold steel hood of his car with a thud. Without a word, one of the officers yanked his wrists behind his back and snapped handcuffs around them. The metallic click echoed louder in his ears than the passing cars. A small crowd began to gather at a distance. Some whispered. A few lifted their phones, recording from across the street. Jonathan could see an older woman frown in silent disapproval while a young mother pulled her child away, shielding his eyes from the scene. "What's the charge?" Jonathan asked through gritted teeth. "Suspicious behavior," the older cop replied flatly. "Possible stolen vehicle." Jonathan shut his eyes briefly, summoning patience he barely felt. "This is my vehicle, registered in my name," he stated evenly. The officers ignored him. They shoved him into the back of their squad car and drove him to the station. No explanación, no Miranda rights, no respect. He was booked like a common criminal. Mug shots taken, fingerprints recorded, locked in a holding cell overnight, surrounded by hardened faces and the stench of stale air. And when they released him the next morning, they handed him a court summons as if it were just another ticket. The fight for justice. Jonathan's humiliation, his helplessness, and his rage were tempered only by his resolve. He had spent his entire career defending the law, upholding the Constitution, and fighting for fairness. But none of it had protected him that night. No degree, no professional title, no resume of federal prosecutions had shielded him from the painful truth. To them, he was just another black man behind the wheel of an expensive car. 3 months passed. 3 months of silence. And now he was here, in this courtroom, ready to fight. The judge presiding over the case was an older man named Harold Whitman. His thinning silver hair was neatly combed back, and deep grooves carved his face from years of sitting in judgment. As Jonathan sat down at the defense table, Judge Whitman barely spared him a glance. His attention was focused instead on the 2 officers standing confidently in their pressed uniforms. They told their story without hesitation, without shame. They described Jonathan as combative, resistant, aggressive. They claimed they had no choice but to subdue him. The judge nodded along with their testimony, his pen scratching occasionally against his notepad. It was a story he had heard before, a story that ended the same way every time. A black man's word against 2 officers of the law, and the law always won. The turning point. Jonathan watched them all closely. He watched the judge. He watched the jury. Most of all, he watched the officers. They were smug, relaxed, confident in the system they had manipulated countless times before. When their testimony ended, Judge Whitman turned his gaze toward Jonathan with something close to boredom. "Mr. Mercer," he said, sighing as if already prepared to dismiss him. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Jonathan stood slowly. He smoothed his suit jacket, adjusted his tie, and then stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and clear. "Yes, Your Honor, I do." He paused for a moment, letting the silence hang before he continued. "My name is Jonathan Mercer. I am a federal prosecutor for the United States Department of Justice." The courtroom froze. You could hear a pin drop. The judge's pen slipped from his hand. The jurors exchanged stunned glances. The 2 officers suddenly went pale. Jonathan Mercer was not a suspect. He was the law, exposing the truth. Jonathan didn't stop there. His gaze swept over the courtroom, steady and unflinching. "I've spent the last 15 years fighting for justice," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "ensuring that the law protects all citizens equally. But when I was pulled over that night, none of that mattered. None of you knew who I was. To them," he gestured at the officers, "I was just another black man who didn't belong in a car like mine." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick file, placing it deliberately on the judge's bench. "Inside this folder," he said, "you will find the following: dashcam footage from my vehicle showing that I cooperated fully, registration proving the car is mine, and detailed records documenting my wrongful arrest and unlawful detention." He laid each piece of evidence down slowly, methodically, as if building a wall brick by brick. "The law is meant to serve justice," he said firmly, "not personal bias. And today, Your Honor, I expect this courtroom to do the same." Judge Whitman's face darkened. He cleared his throat, fumbling as he flipped through the papers. With each page, his expression shifted, uncertainty creeping into the hard lines of his features. He had made a terrible mistake, and now everyone in the room knew it. The whispers spread quickly. Some jurors shook their heads. Others stared at the officers, whose earlier bravado had evaporated entirely. Justice delivered. Judge Whitman took a long breath. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. Case dismissed. All charges dropped. But Jonathan wasn't finished. I respectfully request a formal investigation be opened into the conduct of Officers Reynolds and Blake, he stated, turning his gaze back to the men who had violated his rights. Because what happened to me happens to innocent people every single day. People without law degrees. People without power. That has to change. The judge hesitated. His gavel hung loosely in his hand. But the weight of the room was against him now. He nodded stiffly. An internal review will be conducted. For once, justice spoke loudly and clearly. A battle won. As Jonathan gathered his belongings, an older black man dressed in worn work clothes approached him quietly. His eyes were wet with unshed tears. "Thank you," the man whispered. "For all of us." Jonathan nodded solemnly. His heart was heavy. The fight was far from over. But today, he had won this battle. Not just for himself, but for every silenced voice that had been ignored for far too long. He had shattered the illusion that power belonged only to a chosen few. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in that courtroom, and beyond, that truth, when spoken with courage, could never be silenced. The lesson: never judge a person by their appearance. Never assume their worth by the color of their skin. Because the truth will always shine through, no matter how deeply injustice tries to bury it. The fight for fairness and equality is far from over. But every stand, every voice, and every act of courage brings us one step closer to justice for all. Thank you for reading. Have a meaningful day.